Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now let's start. Vienna, 1853. A city of waltz and whispers, where the Danube flowed like silk beneath the moonlight and the Habsburg Empire stretched across the continent like a vast, troubled dream. Lydia Kovacs stood at the ornate window of her temporary apartments in Schönbrunn Palace, her fingers tracing idle patterns on the cold glass. Beyond, the formal gardens were dusted with the first snow of winter, transforming the meticulously planned landscape into something wild and unfamiliar. Much like her life had become. 3 weeks ago, she had been the daughter of a Hungarian nobleman with modest political influence. Now, she was to be the bride of Emperor Franz Joseph I, ruler of the Austrian Empire and the lands of her birth. A strategic marriage, they called it. A way to heal the wounds left by the failed Hungarian Revolution of 1848. Her father had negotiated the match with all the emotion one might bring to a cattle auction. "My lady, it's time for your fitting." The lady-in-waiting's voice broke through Lydia's thoughts, the German words still strange to her Hungarian ears despite years of required study. Lydia turned, her face a careful mask of serenity that had become her only defense in this foreign court. "Thank you, Helene." The wedding dress was a confection of silk and pearls, designed to transform her into a Habsburg empress. As the royal dressmakers fussed around her, pinning and adjusting, Lydia felt herself diminishing, becoming merely a vessel for imperial ambitions. "You must stand straighter, Lady Kovacs," the head dressmaker admonished. "An empress never slouches." Lydia obliged, lifting her chin with practiced dignity. She was 22 years old and had been preparing for an advantageous marriage since girlhood, though none had imagined it would be to the emperor himself. Franz Joseph was not yet 25, unmarried despite expectations, and in need of an alliance that would pacify his fractious empire. "Is His Imperial Majesty returned from the military exercises?" Lydia asked, attempting to sound merely curious rather than anxious. Helene exchanged glances with the other attendants. "The emperor remains with his troops along the northern frontier. General Blackburn is expected to deliver dispatches today." General Benedict Valcourt. The name echoed in Lydia's mind. She had seen him only twice since her arrival, a tall, severe figure in the imperial blue uniform, always at the emperor's side, always watching with eyes that seemed to see too much. Unlike the sycophantic courtiers who treated her with exaggerated deference, the general had merely offered her a curt bow and a measuring gaze that had made her feel curiously exposed. As the afternoon light faded, Lydia was finally released from the fitting. She retreated to her private sitting room, where a small fire battled against the persistent chill. Picking up a volume of Goethe, she had been instructed to improve her German literature knowledge. She tried to lose herself in the words, but found her mind wandering. The soft knock at her door was unexpected. Helene entered with a small silver tray bearing a sealed letter. "From General Valcourt, my lady. He requests an audience." Lydia's heart quickened inexplicably. "The general? Has something happened to His Majesty?" "He did not say, my lady. He awaits your response in the Rose Salon." The letter contained only a few lines in a strong, decisive hand. "Lady Kovacs, I bear news from the emperor that should be delivered privately. Your discretion is appreciated." Lydia sent word that she would receive him. She changed from her informal afternoon dress into a more suitable reception gown of deep burgundy, her fingers fumbling with the buttons as her lady's maid assisted her. The Rose Salon was a small, intimate room used for private meetings, its walls adorned with pastoral scenes of imperial estates. General Valcourt stood by the window, his back to the door, looking out at the darkening gardens. He turned at the sound of her entrance, and Lydia was struck again by the intensity of his presence. He was perhaps 35, with dark hair threaded with premature silver at the temples and a face that spoke of battlefields and burdens. "Lady Kovacs." He bowed, correct and formal. "General Valcourt." She curtsied in return, maintaining the proper distance between them. "You have news from His Imperial Majesty?" "I do." He gestured to the chairs positioned near the fire. "Please." Lydia sat, arranging her skirts with practiced grace. The general remained standing, his posture military straight, hands clasped behind his back. "The emperor has been delayed at the northern frontier. There have been complications with the Russian diplomatic mission." He spoke carefully, each word measured. He has asked me to inform you that the wedding preparations will continue, but the ceremony may need to be postponed by several weeks. Relief and apprehension mingled in Lydia's chest. I see. And is there reason for concern about these complications, General? Something flickered in his gray eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that she would ask about political matters rather than wedding details. The Emperor does not wish you to be troubled with such concerns, he said, the diplomatic answer of a man accustomed to guarding imperial secrets. And yet I am to be his empress, Lydia replied, a rare flash of her true self breaking through the carefully constructed facade. Should I not understand the empire I will help to govern? General Valcourt studied her for a long moment. The Russian envoy has made certain territorial demands regarding the Ottoman frontier. Your Hungarian background makes you uniquely valuable in this moment, Lady Kovacs. The Emperor hopes your presence at court will remind the Magyar nobility of their obligations to the crown. The truth, spoken plainly. Lydia appreciated it, even as it confirmed her status as a political pawn. Thank you for your honesty, General. It is refreshing after weeks of courtiers telling me only what they believe I wish to hear. A slight softening around his eyes was the only indication that her words had affected him. Truth is a rare commodity at court, my lady. I would advise you to guard it carefully when you find it. Their conversation was brief, formal, yet as Lydia watched him leave, she felt something she had not experienced since arriving in Vienna: curiosity. General Valcourt was not like the other men at court. There was something unvarnished about him, a quality that spoke of battlefields rather than ballrooms. Over the next fortnight, as winter settled more deeply over Vienna, Lydia found herself increasingly isolated. The imperial court hummed with preparations for her wedding to an absent emperor, while she was expected to remain a beautiful, silent symbol of Habsburg-Hungarian reconciliation. Her only respite came in the early mornings when the palace still slept. She would walk in the frost-covered gardens, accompanied only by a single lady-in-waiting who could be persuaded to maintain a discreet distance. It was during one such walk that she encountered General Valcourt again. He was returning from the stables, his breath clouding in the cold air, when their paths crossed on a narrow garden path bordered by dormant rose bushes. Lady Kovacs. He seemed surprised to see her abroad so early. General. She nodded, noting the mud on his boots and the map case tucked under his arm. You are working while the court still sleeps? The empire's concerns do not respect the hours kept by courtiers. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Lydia found herself smiling in return. Nor do mine, it seems. They fell into step beside each other, an impropriety so slight it barely registered, yet in the rigid protocol of the Habsburg court, it felt dangerously intimate. You prefer the gardens in winter? He asked. I prefer them empty, she admitted. In Hungary, my father's estate had wild lands beyond the formal gardens. I missed the freedom to walk without being observed. General Valcourt nodded, understanding in his eyes. The price of imperial attention is constant scrutiny. You speak from experience? I have served the emperor since he took the throne. I have seen how isolation follows power. They paused at a stone fountain, now silent and frozen. In the distance, Lydia could see her lady-in-waiting watching with barely concealed curiosity. Is there news from His Majesty? She asked, returning to safer ground. He returns next week. The negotiations have progressed more favorably than expected. Lydia nodded, ignoring the flutter of anxiety in her stomach. Her wedding would proceed. Her fate was sealed. You do not appear overjoyed at the prospect of your imperial marriage, General Valcourt observed, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Lydia stiffened. It is an honor to serve the empire through this alliance. Indeed, but not all honors are sought after. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Lydia felt truly seen for the first time since arriving in Vienna. It was unsettling, this sudden connection with a man who was, by all measures, a stranger. I should return to the palace, she said, breaking the moment. The Countess von Esterhazy expects me for morning tea. General Valcourt bowed. Of course. Good day, Lady Kovacs. As she walked away, Lydia was acutely aware of his gaze following her, and more disconcertingly, of her own desire to look back. The emperor's return to Vienna was marked by ceremonial cannon fire and the pealing of church bells across the city. Lydia, dressed in imperial blue as a show of loyalty, waited with the court in the grand reception hall of the Habsburg Palace. She had rehearsed this moment countless times with her protocol instructors. The precise depth of her curtsy, the exact words of greeting, the proper distance to maintain until invited closer. Franz Joseph entered the hall in full military dress, his young face serious beneath his whiskers. He moved through the assembled nobility with practiced efficiency, receiving their homage with brief nods of acknowledgement. General Valcourt followed 2 steps behind, his face impassive. When the emperor reached Lydia, she sank into a deep curtsy, eyes lowered. "Your Imperial Majesty." "Lady Kovacs." His voice was pleasant but detached. "Rise. Let me look at my bride." She stood, meeting his gaze with appropriate modesty. Franz Joseph studied her with the same clinical interest he might give a newly acquired painting or horse. He was handsome in a conventional way, with clear blue eyes and the distinctive Habsburg jaw partially concealed by his well-groomed beard. "You will do nicely," he declared, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "The Hungarian nobility will be pleased with the honor I bestow upon their daughter." "I am grateful for your Majesty's favor," Lydia responded, the words practiced until they felt empty of meaning. Franz Joseph nodded, satisfied, then moved on to the next courtier. The encounter had lasted less than a minute, yet it had sealed her future. Lydia remained standing where he had left her, maintaining her composure while feeling oddly hollow. It was only when she raised her eyes that she noticed General Valcourt watching her, his expression unreadable. For a brief moment, their gazes held across the crowded hall, and Lydia felt a current of understanding pass between them before protocol demanded she look away. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparations. Lydia's life became a ceaseless round of fittings, etiquette lessons, and carefully orchestrated public appearances alongside her imperial fiancé. Franz Joseph was unfailingly correct in his behavior toward her, but there was no warmth in his manner, no suggestion that he viewed their match as anything but a political necessity. "The emperor is devoted to his empire above all else," explained Countess von Esterházy, who had been appointed to guide Lydia through the labyrinth of court protocol. "Your role is to provide stability and, God willing, heirs. Do not expect the romantic notions found in novels." Lydia had long since abandoned such notions, but even she had hoped for some measure of companionship in her marriage. It was becoming clear that Franz Joseph saw her primarily as a symbol, a living treaty between his crown and her restive homeland. Her only moments of genuine human connection came unexpectedly, in the brief encounters with General Valcourt that punctuated her days. A chance meeting in the palace library, where she discovered him poring over military maps. A formal dinner where he was seated near enough for occasional conversation. A moment in the Imperial Art Gallery when they found themselves alone before a Titian painting of Europa's abduction. "Do you know the myth?" he had asked, standing beside her before the dramatic canvas. "Europa was deceived by Zeus, who took the form of a bull to carry her away from her homeland," Lydia replied. "I have always found it a troubling story. Because of the deception? Because she never returned home." Lydia's voice was soft. She became a queen in a foreign land, but lost everything she knew. General Valcourt had looked at her then with an intensity that made her breath catch. Not everything was lost. She gave her name to a continent. Cold comfort, perhaps, for a woman who never chose her fate. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of other courtiers, but the moment lingered in Lydia's mind, a small flicker of understanding in the isolation of her position. 2 weeks before the wedding, Franz Joseph summoned Lydia to his private study, a rare occurrence that set the court whispering. She was escorted through the labyrinthine corridors of the Habsburg by an imperial guard, finally arriving at a massive oak door flanked by sentries. The emperor's study was a masculine space of dark wood and leather, maps covering one wall, and a massive desk dominating the center of the room. Franz Joseph stood when she entered, but did not move to greet her. General Valcourt was present, standing by the window, a fact that both surprised and oddly reassured Lydia. "Lady Kovacs." The emperor gestured to a chair. "Please sit." Lydia obeyed, folding her hands in her lap to hide their slight trembling. "I have received a letter from your father," Franz Joseph began without preamble. "It seems there are concerns among certain Magyar nobles about the terms of our marriage treaty." Lydia's heart sank. Her father had not written to her directly since her arrival in Vienna. "I was not aware of any concerns, Your Majesty." "No, you wouldn't be." His tone was dismissive. "General Valcourt will be traveling to Budapest tomorrow to meet with your father and address these issues. I thought it appropriate that you might provide a letter to accompany him, assuring your family of your well-being and commitment to our union." "Of course, Your Majesty." Lydia kept her voice steady, though her mind raced with questions. What concerns could her father have raised now, so close to the wedding? And why send General Valcourt, the Emperor's most trusted advisor, rather than a diplomatic envoy? Good. Franz Joseph returned his attention to the papers on his desk, a clear dismissal. "The General will collect your letter this evening." Lydia rose, curtsied, and withdrew from the study, her thoughts in turmoil. As she reached the corridor, she heard footsteps behind her and turned to find General Valcourt had followed her out. "Lady Kovacs." His voice was low, meant only for her ears. "A moment, please." They stepped into an alcove, partially hidden from the busy corridor by a heavy tapestry depicting a Habsburg military victory. The proximity was improper, but Lydia found herself more concerned with the gravity in the general's expression. "What is happening?" she asked, abandoning protocol in her need for honesty. "Why is my father raising objections now?" General Valcourt glanced around to ensure they were not overheard. "Your father has requested additional concessions for Hungarian autonomy. He is using your marriage as leverage." The realization struck Lydia like a physical blow. "He is bargaining with my future, as is the Emperor." The general's eyes held a sympathetic understanding that nearly undid her careful composure. "I thought you should know the true nature of my mission before writing your letter." "Thank you." Lydia took a steadying breath. "What does His Majesty expect me to write?" "A daughter's reassurance that will calm a father's concerns." "And if my father's concerns are justified?" General Valcourt's expression softened slightly. "Then you must decide where your loyalties lie, Lady Kovacs. With your homeland or your future husband?" The question hung between them, unanswerable in its complexity. Lydia was saved from responding by the approach of a court chamberlain, forcing them to step apart and resume their formal roles. "I will call for your letter at 7 this evening," General Valcourt said, loud enough for the chamberlain to hear. "His Majesty thanks you for your cooperation in this matter." Lydia nodded, her mind already struggling with what she would write. As she watched the general walk away, she realized with startling clarity that he was the only person in Vienna who had offered her truth rather than flattery or commands. That evening, Lydia sat at her writing desk for hours, drafting and discarding multiple versions of her letter. The empty pages seemed to mock her attempts to bridge the impossible divide between duty to her homeland and loyalty to her future husband. In the end, she wrote simply and from the heart, addressing her father with the respectful formality he had always demanded. When General Valcourt arrived to collect the letter, Lydia handed it to him with a steady hand. "I have written what I believe to be true, General. Whether it will satisfy either His Majesty or my father remains to be seen." He accepted the sealed letter, his fingers briefly brushing hers. "Truth rarely satisfies those in power, Lady Kovacs, but it honors those who speak it. Will you?" She hesitated, then continued with quiet urgency. "Will you tell me what you find in Budapest? Not the official report, but what you truly observe of my people's condition." General Valcourt studied her face for a long moment. "You ask me to place your interests above the Emperor's. I ask for honesty in a court built on deception." Lydia met his gaze unflinchingly. "Is that too much to request?" "Perhaps it is the only thing worth requesting." The corner of his mouth lifted in a brief, private smile. "I will tell you what I observe, Lady Kovacs. You have my word." After he departed for Hungary the following morning, Lydia found herself counting the days until his return with an anticipation that had nothing to do with political negotiations and everything to do with the man himself. It was a dangerous feeling, one she could scarcely acknowledge even in the privacy of her own thoughts. General Valcourt returned to Vienna 5 days later, arriving at the palace late in the evening after a hard journey. Lydia received word of his arrival through Helene, who had developed a network of informants among the palace servants. "The general has gone directly to report to the Emperor," Helene told her as she brushed Lydia's hair before bed. "They say he looks grim, my lady." Lydia's heart sank. "Thank you, Helene. That will be all for tonight." Sleep eluded her as she imagined what news Benedict Valcourt might have brought back from Hungary. Had her father made impossible demands? Was her wedding to be cancelled, her position at court rendered untenable? Morning brought no answers, only the usual routine of imperial life continuing around her as if nothing had changed. It was not until afternoon, during her daily walk in the winter garden, that General Valcourt found her. He looked tired, with shadows beneath his eyes and dust from the road still clinging to his uniform despite obvious attempts to make himself presentable. Lydia dismissed her lady-in-waiting with a gentle command, allowing them a rare moment of privacy among the dormant flowers and stone pathways. "You have seen my father," she said, searching his face for clues. "I have." General Valcourt fell into step beside her, their pace slow and measured. "He sends his regards, but not his blessing." Lydia could read the truth in his careful phrasing. "Your father is a proud man, devoted to Hungary's interests." The general chose his words with diplomatic precision. "He believes the emperor has not offered sufficient guarantees for Magyar autonomy." And the emperor's response? "His Majesty believes he has been more than generous in his concessions. He views your father's demands as opportunistic and ungrateful." They reached a stone bench partially sheltered by a leafless arbor. Lydia sat, suddenly needing the support. General Valcourt remained standing, his military bearing unwavering despite his evident fatigue. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The wedding will proceed as planned. The emperor will not be seen to capitulate to pressure, especially from Hungarian nobility so soon after the rebellion." "And my father?" General Valcourt hesitated, then sat beside her on the bench, a breach of protocol that spoke volumes about the gravity of the moment. "Your father has declined the emperor's invitation to attend the wedding. He claims pressing business in Budapest requires his presence." The pain of this rejection was sharper than Lydia had anticipated. She had known her father viewed her marriage as a political transaction, but to refuse to witness it struck at something deep and vulnerable within her. "I see." She fought to keep her voice steady. "Then I shall become empress without family to stand beside me." "Lady Kovacs." General Valcourt's voice softened. "Lydia." The use of her given name startled her, breaking through her carefully maintained composure. She looked up to find his eyes on her, filled with a compassion that threatened to undo her entirely. "Your father showed me your childhood home," he continued quietly. "The library where you learned to read. The garden where you planted roses when you were 12. He speaks of you with pride, even as he uses your marriage for political advantage." Tears pricked at Lydia's eyes, but she blinked them away. "You went beyond your diplomatic duties, General Benedict," he corrected gently. "And yes, I did. I wanted to understand the woman who would be our empress, not merely the symbol Hungary has offered to the imperial crown." The intimacy of the moment wrapped around them like a physical presence. Lydia was acutely aware of how close they sat, of the impropriety of their conversation, of the dangerous territory into which her heart was venturing. "You should not say such things," she whispered, though she made no move to increase the distance between them. "No, I should not." His voice was equally quiet. "Just as you should not ask me for truth the emperor would prefer remain unspoken. Yet here we are." The sound of approaching footsteps broke the moment. They stood quickly, resuming appropriate positions as a palace gardener appeared around a hedge, pushing a wheelbarrow laden with winter mulch. He bowed hastily upon seeing them and altered his course. "I must report to the military council," General Valcourt said, his tone returning to formal correctness. "His Majesty has concerns about Russian movements near Galicia." Lydia nodded, gathering her composure around her like a cloak. "Thank you for your candor regarding my father, General. I shall treasure the glimpses of home you have brought me." He bowed over her hand, the proper farewell between a high-ranking military officer and a future empress. But as he straightened, their eyes met once more, and Lydia knew with devastating certainty that something irrevocable had changed between them. The days before the wedding passed in a blur of ceremonial preparations and diplomatic maneuvering. Franz Joseph remained distant, meeting with Lydia only for official functions where they presented a united front to the court and visiting dignitaries. If he was troubled by her father's refusal to attend the wedding, he gave no sign of it. General Valcourt, Benedict, as she had come to think of him in the privacy of her thoughts, was increasingly absent from court, sent by the emperor on a series of military inspections that kept him away from Vienna. Lydia understood the strategic separation but found herself watching doorways and scanning crowded rooms for his tall figure nonetheless. It was 3 days before the wedding when Countess von Esterházy delivered unexpected news during Lydia's morning toilette. His Majesty has decided you will accompany him to the military review at Schönbrunn today, the Countess announced, inspecting Lydia's riding habit with a critical eye. General Valcourt has returned from Bohemia and will present the new cavalry formations for imperial approval. Lydia's heart quickened at the mention of Benedict's name, though she kept her expression neutral. I am honored by His Majesty's inclusion. It is a significant gesture, the Countess agreed. The Emperor rarely includes women in military functions. You must appear suitably appreciative but not overly interested in the proceedings. Military matters remain firmly in the masculine domain. The military review was held on the vast parade grounds behind Schönbrunn Palace, where thousands of imperial troops stood in perfect formation under a cold December sky. Lydia rode side-saddle on a docile gray mare provided by the imperial stables, positioned slightly behind Franz Joseph on his magnificent white stallion. From this vantage point, she watched as Benedict rode forward to greet the emperor, resplendent in his dress uniform with gold braid catching the winter sunlight. He bowed from the saddle, then straightened to deliver his report on the cavalry's readiness with crisp military precision. General Valcourt has distinguished himself in reorganizing our mounted forces, Franz Joseph remarked to Lydia, one of the few direct comments he had made to her all day. His loyalty to the crown is beyond question. The Empire is fortunate in his service, Lydia replied carefully. Franz Joseph nodded, his attention already returning to the troops before them. After our marriage, you would do well to consult him on matters of Hungarian administration. He understands the Magyar temperament better than most of my Austrian advisors. The emperor's casual recommendation struck Lydia with unexpected force. That Franz Joseph would suggest she work closely with Benedict after their marriage seemed both a blessing and a curse, an opportunity for continued connection wrapped in the painful reminder of her impending vows to another man. The review proceeded with military precision, culminating in a thunderous cavalry charge across the frost-hardened field that sent birds scattering from nearby trees. Benedict led the charge personally, his horsemanship evident in the fluid way he moved with his mount. As the troops reformed before the imperial party, he guided his horse to where Lydia and the emperor waited. Impressive display, General, Franz Joseph declared. The Russian attaché will report favorably on our military readiness, I think. That was my hope, Your Majesty. Benedict bowed again, his eyes briefly meeting Lydia's before returning to the emperor. With your permission, I would escort Lady Kovacs back to the palace. The wind is picking up, and the temperature drops quickly at this hour. Franz Joseph waved a hand in absent permission. Yes, see to my bride's comfort. I wish to inspect the artillery positions with Field Marshal Radetzky. Benedict guided his horse alongside Lydia's as they turned back toward the palace, a small honor guard following at a discreet distance. For several minutes, they rode in silence, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the occasional jingle of military tack. You ride well, Benedict observed finally. Hungarian ladies are known for their horsemanship. My father insisted I learn, Lydia replied. He said a woman should know how to control 1,000 pounds of animal with nothing but her will and a thin strip of leather. Wise advice for an empress. The comment hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Lydia gathered her courage and asked the question that had haunted her since his return. Did you request this assignment today? To escort me. Benedict's gaze remained fixed on the path ahead. I did. Why? Now he turned to look at her, his expression serious. Because in 3 days, you will be the emperor's wife, and I will never again have the opportunity to speak with you alone. The simple truth of his statement struck Lydia with physical force. And what is it you wish to say to me, General Valcourt? He guided his horse closer, their knees almost touching as they rode side by side. That I have served the Habsburg throne my entire adult life. That I have bled for this empire and would die for it without hesitation. His voice dropped lower, meant only for her ears. And that since meeting you, I have questioned every certainty I once held dear. Lydia's breath caught in her throat. Benedict, I know. He cut her off gently. I know what cannot be. I know what duty demands of us both. But before you take your vows, I needed you to know that someone at this court sees you. Not the Hungarian countess, not the future empress, but you, Lydia. They had reached a small copse of trees that screened them momentarily from both the palace ahead and the honor guard behind. Benedict reached across the space between them and briefly, daringly, covered her gloved hand with his own. In another life, he said softly, I would have courted you properly. I would have asked permission to write to you, to visit your father's estate, to walk with you in gardens where we needed no excuses to be alone. Tears threatened, but Lydia held them back through sheer force of will. In another life, she whispered, I would have welcomed your courtship. The moment stretched between them, fragile and precious. Then Benedict straightened in his saddle, withdrawing his hand as the honor guard emerged from behind the trees. The palace architects did remarkable work restoring the east wing after the fire of 47, he said in a normal tone, seamlessly transitioning to innocuous conversation. You can hardly tell where the new stonework begins. Lydia followed his lead, responding with appropriate interest in the palace history as they completed their ride. But beneath the mundane exchange, something profound had altered. They had acknowledged what existed between them, even as they recognized its impossibility. That night, alone in her chambers, Lydia finally allowed her tears to fall. She wept for the path not taken, for the happiness that duty denied her, for the man she could have loved in a different world. And when the tears were spent, she made her choice. She would honor her commitment to Franz Joseph, to the empire, to the peace her marriage was meant to secure. But she would carry the memory of Benedict Valcourt's honest eyes and gentle words like a talisman against the loneliness of her imperial future. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and cold, the sun glinting off fresh snow that had fallen during the night. Vienna had been transformed into a fairy tale city of white and gold, imperial flags snapping in the winter breeze from every building. By imperial decree, even the poorest districts had been decorated with evergreen boughs and yellow ribbons, the Habsburg colors a reminder of who ruled these diverse lands. In her chambers, Lydia submitted to the ministrations of a dozen attendants who bathed her in rose-scented water, dressed her in layers of silk and lace, and adorned her dark hair with diamond stars that had once belonged to Maria Theresa herself. The wedding dress was a masterpiece of ivory silk embroidered with silver thread and seed pearls, its train so long it required 6 young noblewomen to carry it. As the final preparations were completed, Countess von Esterhazy dismissed the other attendants, leaving her alone with the bride. You look every inch an empress, the countess said, genuine admiration in her voice. But I must speak plainly before you leave this room, child. Lydia met the older woman's gaze in the mirror. Please do. I have watched you these past months. You have conducted yourself with dignity and grace beyond your years. The countess's eyes were kind but penetrating. But I have also seen how you look at General Valcourt, and how he looks at you when he believes himself unobserved. Lydia's heart stuttered in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. The general has been kind to me during a difficult transition. Indeed. The countess adjusted one of the diamond stars with practiced fingers. And because I have grown fond of you, I will offer this advice. What exists between you must end today. The emperor may seem distant, even cold, but he is not unobservant. Court factions would use even the suggestion of impropriety to undermine your position. There has been no impropriety, Lydia said softly. In action, perhaps not, but in your heart. The countess laid a gentle hand on Lydia's shoulder. The heart must follow where duty leads, my dear. That is the burden of those born to privilege. Before Lydia could respond, a knock at the door announced the arrival of the imperial chamberlain. It was time. The wedding ceremony at St. Stephen's Cathedral was everything the empire expected, grand, solemn, and rich with centuries of Habsburg tradition. Lydia moved through it as if in a dream, speaking her vows in clear, steady German, while thousands of eyes watched her transformation from Hungarian countess to Austrian empress. Franz Joseph was correct and formal beside her, his responses firm and unwavering. When he placed the imperial wedding ring on her finger, a massive diamond surrounded by smaller stones in the Habsburg colors, his hands were warm and dry, betraying no nervousness or emotion. Throughout the 3-hour ceremony, Lydia allowed herself only one moment of weakness. As she turned to process back down the cathedral aisle on her new husband's arm, her eyes scanned the assembled dignitaries until they found Benedict, standing rigid in his formal uniform among the military leadership. Their gazes met for the briefest instant before Lydia forced herself to look away, focusing instead on the golden future that imperial propagandists had promised awaited her. The wedding celebrations continued for a week, a dizzying succession of balls, concerts, military parades, and public appearances designed to cement the image of imperial unity and Hungarian reconciliation in the public mind. Lydia performed her role flawlessly, smiling and waving to cheering crowds, dancing with perfect form at court functions, and speaking with carefully rehearsed charm to foreign ambassadors. Franz Joseph, too, played his part, treating his new empress with public affection and respect. In private, their relationship remained formal but not unkind. He visited her bedchamber on their wedding night and twice thereafter, fulfilling his marital duties with efficient consideration before returning to his own apartments. "You are all that I hoped for in an empress," he told her on the third night, pausing at her door before taking his leave. "Your dignity and composure do credit to both our nations." It was, perhaps, the most personal comment he had made to her since their marriage. Lydia recognized it as high praise from a man whose emotional life was subordinated entirely to his concept of imperial duty. "Thank you, Your Majesty," she replied. "I hope always to serve the empire well." He nodded, satisfied, and departed. Lydia sat before her mirror as her night-maid brushed her hair, wondering if this cordial arrangement was what her marriage would always be. Mutual respect without passion, companionship without intimacy, duty without love. As imperial life settled into routine after the wedding festivities, Lydia discovered that an empress's days were surprisingly structured. Mornings were devoted to correspondence and receiving petitions, afternoons to charitable patronage and cultural events, evenings to state dinners or official receptions. Franz Joseph consulted her on matters related to Hungarian affairs, as he had suggested he would, but otherwise left her to establish her own priorities within the strict boundaries of court protocol. It was in this context that Lydia received an imperial memorandum 2 weeks after her wedding, informing her that General Valcourt had been appointed as her military liaison for matters concerning Hungarian territorial administration. The document, bearing Franz Joseph's seal but not his signature, stated that the general would report to her weekly on security matters related to her homeland. The first such meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon in her public reception room, with her ladies-in-waiting and imperial secretaries in attendance. Lydia prepared meticulously, studying reports on Hungarian provincial governance and military deployments so that she would appear knowledgeable and composed when facing Benedict again. When he arrived, precisely on time and in full dress uniform, Lydia was seated at her desk surrounded by attendants. She acknowledged him with imperial formality, gesturing to the chair positioned across from her. "General Valcourt, His Majesty has spoken highly of your understanding of Hungarian affairs." Benedict bowed, his face a mask of professional detachment. "Your Imperial Majesty is gracious. I have prepared a report on the current disposition of troops along the eastern counties." For the next hour, they conducted themselves with impeccable correctness, discussing military matters in the dispassionate language of official business. Only once, when Benedict handed her a dispatch from the governor of her home province, did their fingers brush momentarily. The brief contact sent a current of awareness through Lydia that she struggled to conceal from the watchful eyes around them. As the meeting concluded, protocol demanded that she dismiss him with a formal acknowledgement of his service. Instead, acting on impulse, Lydia rose from her chair. "General, would you walk with me to the window? I wish to show you something." Surprise flickered in his eyes, but he followed her to the tall windows overlooking the palace gardens, maintaining a respectful distance as court etiquette required. "Do you see that path there, beside the frozen fountain?" Lydia asked, pointing to a secluded walkway barely visible from their vantage point. "Yes, Your Majesty. I have taken to walking there in the late afternoons, just before sunset. The Imperial Guards find it tedious duty in this cold weather, and often maintain their distance." She spoke softly, her eyes on the gardens rather than his face. I find the solitude refreshing after days filled with ceremony. Benedict was silent for a moment, understanding dawning in his eyes. The emperor is concerned about security in all areas of the palace grounds. Perhaps I should inspect this area personally to ensure your majesty's safety during these walks. That would be most thorough of you, General. Lydia turned from the window, her expression serene though her heart raced. Shall we say tomorrow at 4? The winter light is particularly beautiful then. As your majesty wishes. Benedict bowed, his voice steady though Lydia could see the pulse beating rapidly at his throat. With a nod of dismissal, she returned to her desk, outwardly calm, while inwardly trembling at her own daring. She had just invited the man she could not stop thinking about to a private meeting, circumventing court protocol through careful wording and implied meanings. It was dangerous, potentially scandalous, and entirely necessary for her peace of mind. The following afternoon found Lydia walking alone on the secluded garden path, having persuaded her ladies to remain within the heated glass orangery some distance away. She had dressed with care in a walking costume of deep burgundy wool, a sable-trimmed cloak protecting her from the winter chill. Her heart leapt when she saw Benedict approaching from the direction of the military offices, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. They met beside the frozen fountain, its silent waters captured in fantastic ice sculptures by the season. For a moment, neither spoke, the reality of their deliberate meeting settling around them like the soft snow that had begun to fall. This is unwise, Benedict said finally, his breath clouding in the cold air. Completely, Lydia agreed. And yet here we are. Why did you arrange this, Lydia? The use of her given name, forbidden now that she was empress, was itself an acknowledgment of boundaries crossed. She looked up at him, abandoning pretense. Because I need one person in this empire with whom I can be myself. One conversation where I am not performing the role of empress. Benedict's expression softened. And you chose me for this dangerous honor? You are the only one who has ever seen me clearly. Lydia took a step closer, close enough to speak in little more than a whisper. The only one who has offered me truth instead of flattery. Truth can be its own form of danger. But he made no move to increase the distance between them. Tell me a truth now, she challenged gently. Benedict looked at her for a long moment, snow gathering on the shoulders of his dark uniform and in the black waves of his hair. I think of you constantly, he admitted, his voice low and strained. I know my duty to the emperor, to the empire we both serve. I know the boundaries that must exist between us, and yet I cannot stop wondering what might have been had we met before your betrothal. The naked honesty of his confession stole Lydia's breath. I wonder the same, she whispered. They stood in silence, snow falling around them, the confession hanging in the air between them. Benedict finally reached out, not to touch her, but to catch a snowflake that had landed on the fur of her collar. We cannot change our circumstances, he said, but perhaps we can find a way to exist within them that preserves both our honor and our sanity. What do you propose? Friendship. He said the word as if it were both a gift and a sacrifice. Open, acknowledged friendship between an empress and one of her military advisors. Nothing improper, nothing hidden. We meet in gardens and libraries, in public spaces where others may see us, but not hear our words. We speak of books and ideas, of Hungary and the empire's future. We create a space where you can be Lydia and I can be Benedict, while the world sees only an empress and her loyal general. Lydia considered his proposal, recognizing both its wisdom and its limitations. And if friendship is not enough, then we will find the strength to make it enough. Benedict's eyes held hers, unwavering. Because the alternative is to destroy everything we both hold dear. Your position, my honor, the stability of an empire still healing from rebellion. The reality of their situation settled over Lydia like the snow accumulating on the garden paths. Benedict was right. They had duties larger than their personal feelings, responsibilities that could not be abandoned for selfish desires. And yet, the prospect of his friendship, of regular conversations where she could be herself without fear of judgment, seemed a precious gift in the isolation of her imperial role. Friendship, she agreed finally. With one condition. Name it. That we are always honest with each other. No courtly deceptions, no diplomatic half-truths. Benedict nodded, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. Honesty. A radical concept at the Habsburg court. Perhaps that's why I need it so desperately. Lydia returned his smile, feeling something tight within her chest loosen for the first time since her wedding day. They walked together through the snowy garden, maintaining a proper distance, discussing Hungarian literature and the architectural merits of various palace buildings. Innocent topics that any passing guard or court observer would find unremarkable. But beneath the mundane conversation flowed a current of understanding, a shared acknowledgement of feelings that could not be acted upon but need not be denied. As darkness began to fall, Benedict escorted Lydia back to the palace entrance where her ladies-in-waiting awaited. He bowed formally over her hand, the picture of military respect for imperial authority. "Until our next meeting, Your Majesty. Thank you for your insights on palace security, General Valcourt." Lydia kept her voice steady, though her heart was anything but. "Your attention to detail is commendable." He straightened, meeting her eyes one last time before she turned to enter the palace. In that brief glance was a promise, of friendship, of honesty, of a connection that would sustain them both through the complexities of their separate duties. Over the weeks that followed, Lydia and Benedict established a careful pattern. Their official meetings continued in her reception room, focused on Hungarian administrative matters with attendants always present. These were supplemented by chance encounters in the palace library, walks in public gardens that could be justified by military security concerns, and occasional conversations at court functions where they might speak privately for a few moments without raising suspicion. Franz Joseph, absorbed in the ceaseless demands of ruling his vast empire, seemed to take no particular notice of his wife's friendship with his trusted general. If anything, he appeared pleased that Lydia was adapting so well to court life and taking an active interest in Hungarian governance. "General Valcourt speaks highly of your understanding of the Magyar situation," the emperor remarked one evening as they dined privately in his study, one of the rare occasions when they spent time alone together. "He says you have a natural instinct for which regional leaders can be trusted." "The general is generous in his assessment," Lydia replied carefully. "I merely share what I observed growing up in Hungarian society." Franz Joseph nodded, his attention already returning to the dispatches beside his plate. "Continue working with him. The situation in the eastern provinces remains delicate." This imperial blessing on their collaboration should have reassured Lydia. Instead, it filled her with a complicated guilt. Her husband trusted her, trusted Benedict, saw nothing improper in their professional relationship. He could not know, must never know, how that relationship had become the emotional center of her life at court. For despite their mutual vow of friendship only, Lydia found her feelings for Benedict deepening with each conversation, each shared observation, each moment of genuine connection in a court built on artifice. She learned about his childhood in a modest military family, his education at the Imperial Academy, the battlefield experiences that had shaped his strategic thinking. He, in turn, discovered her passion for Hungarian poetry, her quiet advocacy for educational reform, her dreams of a more unified empire where different nationalities might maintain their cultural identities while sharing common purpose. They were careful never to touch beyond the formal contact required by court etiquette. No hands lingering too long, no accidental brushing of shoulders in palace corridors. The physical distance between them was maintained with rigid discipline, even as the emotional distance vanished entirely. Spring arrived in Vienna, transforming the palace gardens from stark winter tableaus to riotous displays of color. With the warmer weather came new challenges to their carefully constructed friendship. Court activities moved outdoors, making private conversations more difficult to arrange. The Empress's schedule filled with garden parties and public appearances, while the general found himself dispatched more frequently to military inspections across the empire. It was during one such separation, with Benedict overseeing troop movements along the Italian border, that Lydia made a discovery that changed everything. The imperial physician confirmed what she had begun to suspect. She was carrying the Habsburg heir. Franz Joseph received the news with dignified satisfaction, immediately ordering prayers of thanksgiving in the palace chapel and preparations for public announcements throughout the empire. A successful pregnancy in the first months of their marriage was precisely what the imperial propaganda machine had hoped for, tangible proof of Habsburg continuity and the success of the Hungarian alliance. "You have done well," the emperor told Lydia, briefly pressing her hand in a rare gesture of affection. The empire will rejoice. That night, alone in her bedchamber, Lydia placed her hands on her still flat stomach and contemplated how this child would transform her position at court. No longer merely the Hungarian bride, she would become the mother of the future emperor. Her status would be elevated, her actions even more closely scrutinized, her every move analyzed for its potential impact on the imperial heir. And Benedict, what would this mean for their careful friendship? The question haunted her as announcements were drafted, celebrations planned, and court protocol adjusted to accommodate her condition. General Valcourt returned to Vienna 2 weeks after the pregnancy announcement, having completed his military inspection tour. Protocol demanded that he pay his respects to the Empress, now elevated further in imperial hierarchy by her expectant state. Their meeting took place in Lydia's formal reception room, with ladies-in-waiting and court officials present at a discreet distance. Benedict bowed deeply before her, his face composed in proper military deference. "Your Imperial Majesty, please accept my congratulations on the joyous news. The Empire celebrates with you." "Thank you, General Valcourt." Lydia kept her voice steady, though her heart raced at the sight of him after weeks apart. "His Majesty and I are gratified by the universal expressions of loyalty this announcement has inspired." The formal exchange continued, Benedict delivering his report on border security while Lydia listened with appropriate imperial interest. Only someone who knew them well would have noticed the tension beneath their practiced composure, the careful way they avoided direct eye contact, the slight strain in their otherwise normal voices. As the meeting concluded, Lydia rose from her chair, a signal for her attendants to withdraw to the edges of the large room, still present but out of immediate earshot. "General, a moment more of your time. I wish to discuss the security arrangements for my summer residence at Bad Ischl. His Majesty suggests I remove to the countryside for the duration of my confinement." Benedict approached, maintaining a respectful distance. "Of course, Your Majesty. The mountain air would be beneficial for your health." Lydia lowered her voice. "Walk with me to the terrace. I need to speak with you privately." They moved to the open doors leading to the stone balcony overlooking the palace gardens. Spring flowers bloomed in geometric patterns below, court gardeners visible as tiny figures tending the elaborate displays. "Congratulations, Lydia," Benedict said softly when they were beyond immediate hearing of the attendants. "I mean that sincerely." "Thank you." She gazed out at the gardens, unable to look at him directly. "Everything changes now." "Yes." A world of understanding in that single word. "The heir to the throne must be protected above all else. Your position, your movements, your associations will be even more closely monitored. Our friendship must continue with even greater caution." Benedict's voice was firm but gentle. "You will need a trusted advisor more than ever as your influence at court grows." Lydia finally turned to face him, searching his eyes for any sign of resentment or pain. She found only steadfast loyalty and carefully contained emotion. "I did not expect to feel so conflicted," she admitted. "I am honored to carry the Habsburg heir. I understand my duty to the empire, to my husband. And yet the heart does not always follow where duty leads," Benedict finished for her. "We have always promised each other honesty, Lydia. I will not pretend that seeing you carry another man's child is easy, even when that man is my emperor and the child is my future sovereign." The raw truth of his admission touched her deeply. "I would not want such pretense between us." "Nor would I." Benedict's gaze held hers, unwavering. "But know this. I will serve you and your child with every fiber of my being. My loyalty to the Habsburg throne remains absolute, even as my heart follows its own path." Lydia blinked back unexpected tears. "How do we proceed?" "One day at a time." Benedict glanced back at the attendants, ensuring they remained at a respectful distance. "We continue our work together on Hungarian affairs. We maintain our friendship within the bounds of propriety. And we find strength in knowing that even in this most constrained of worlds, we have found someone who truly sees us as we are." It was not enough. It could never be enough. And yet it was all they could have. This connection of minds and hearts that circumstances forbade from becoming anything more. "I leave for Bad Ischl in a fortnight," Lydia said. "The Emperor has appointed you to oversee security for the imperial summer residence. You will be part of my household there." Benedict's eyebrows rose slightly at this news. The emperor suggested this arrangement. He trusts you implicitly. The irony was not lost on either of them. And he knows I value your counsel on Hungarian matters. Then I will serve to the best of my ability. Benedict bowed slightly, a gesture visible to anyone watching, but containing a personal devotion that only Lydia could recognize. We will ensure the Habsburg heir arrives safely into this world. As spring blossomed into summer, Lydia settled into the imperial villa at Bad Ischl, an elegant retreat nestled among the Alpine foothills. The mountain air was indeed beneficial, easing the discomforts of her advancing pregnancy and providing respite from the stifling protocol of the Vienna court. Franz Joseph visited when state business allowed, spending a few days each month reviewing her health with the imperial physicians and discussing affairs of state before returning to the capital. In his absence, the villa operated under a more relaxed protocol. Lydia established a daily routine that included morning walks in the extensive gardens, afternoons spent reading or corresponding with Hungarian noble families, and evenings listening to chamber music in the villa's intimate concert room. Benedict's presence as head of security provided a steady counterpoint to her days. Their professional interactions continued in full view of the court, with regular meetings to discuss both Hungarian affairs and security arrangements for the imperial birth expected in late autumn. These official encounters were supplemented by what appeared to be chance meetings in the villa's library or on the garden paths, where they might speak more freely while still maintaining appropriate distance. It was during one such conversation, on a warm July evening as they walked along a shaded path within sight of but not hearing distance from her ladies, that Lydia broached a subject that had been troubling her. "The Hungarian nationalist factions are growing restless again," she said, her hand resting lightly on her swelling abdomen as they walked at a measured pace. "My father's letters suggest there is discontent with the pace of reforms." Benedict nodded, his hands clasped behind his back in military posture. "We have received similar reports. There are whispers of demonstrations in Budapest. Will there be another crackdown?" Lydia's concern was evident in her voice. "More martial law, more arrests." "The emperor has not yet decided." Benedict's tone was carefully neutral. "He awaits my recommendations on the matter." Lydia stopped walking, turning to face him directly. "And what will you recommend, General?" The formal address was deliberate, a reminder of his official position and responsibilities. Benedict met her gaze steadily. "The truth? I will recommend a measured response. Visible military presence, but no mass arrests unless violence erupts. And I will suggest that the birth of an heir with Hungarian blood might be leveraged to calm tensions, a reminder that the future of the empire includes Magyar interests. Using my child as a political symbol." Lydia's voice held no judgment, only recognition of imperial reality. "A reality you have always understood." Benedict's expression softened slightly. "But I will also recommend that Hungarian cultural concessions accompany any security measures. Schools teaching in the Magyar language, administrative positions for qualified Hungarian nobles, the restoration of certain local governance structures." Hope flickered in Lydia's chest. "You believe the emperor will accept such recommendations? For me alone? Perhaps not. But from me, supported by his pregnant empress who has proven her loyalty to the Habsburg throne?" Benedict allowed himself a small smile. He might be persuaded. The realization of what he was suggesting, a political alliance to match their personal connection, dawned on Lydia slowly. "You would have us work together to influence imperial policy toward Hungary? Is that not what an empress and her trusted advisor should do? Serve the best interests of the empire by counseling its ruler with wisdom and foresight." Benedict's eyes held hers. "We have been given positions of influence, Lydia. Perhaps this is how we justify the personal sacrifices those positions demand." The possibility was both exhilarating and daunting, that their impossible personal situation might be transformed into a force for positive change within the empire, that the connection they could never fully acknowledge might still serve a greater purpose. "I will speak to Franz Joseph when he visits next week," Lydia decided. "I will express concern for the stability of my homeland and suggest that the birth of our child presents an opportunity for reconciliation rather than repression. And I will have reports ready documenting the potential benefits of cultural concessions versus the costs of military action." Benedict nodded, professional satisfaction evident in his bearing. "The emperor respects data and strategic thinking." They had reached the end of the garden path, where it opened onto a wider lawn visible from the villa terraces. Their private conversation must end here, transitioning back to formal interaction for any watching eyes. "Thank you for your security assessment, General Valcourt," Lydia said in a carrying voice. "Please ensure the additional guards are posted before the Emperor's arrival." Benedict bowed. "As you command, Your Majesty. The safety of the imperial heir is our highest priority." As he straightened, their eyes met once more, holding a world of unspoken understanding. They had found a path forward, not the one their hearts might have chosen, but one that honored both their feelings and their duties. It was not perfect, but in the imperfect world of imperial politics, it was perhaps the best they could hope for. The summer months passed in this careful balance of public duty and private understanding. Their political collaboration bore fruit when Franz Joseph, influenced by their coordinated council, issued a proclamation of cultural protections for Hungarian institutions to coincide with the announcement of the imperial heir's imminent arrival. The gesture was well received in Budapest, with even Lydia's father writing to express cautious approval of his daughter's apparent influence. As autumn painted the Alps in vibrant color, Lydia's time grew near. The emperor returned to Bad Ischl to await the birth, bringing with him an entourage of court officials and medical specialists. Benedict found his access to Lydia suddenly restricted as imperial protocol tightened around the impending birth. On a crisp October morning, Lydia's labor began. For 18 hours, she endured the rigors of childbirth behind the closed doors of the imperial bedchamber, attended by physicians and midwives while Franz Joseph waited in his study, receiving regular reports on her progress. Benedict maintained his post outside the villa, overseeing security with rigid discipline while his thoughts remained fixed on the woman fighting for life within. Court protocol dictated that military officers had no place in birthing chambers, yet he found himself inventing reasons to patrol the corridors near her rooms, straining for any news of her condition. It was well past midnight when the cry of a newborn finally echoed through the imperial apartments. Within minutes, the official announcement spread through the villa and beyond. Empress Lydia had delivered a healthy son, a crown prince for the Habsburg Empire. Franz Joseph emerged from his study, accepting congratulations with dignified pleasure before proceeding to his wife's chambers to view his heir. Cannon fire echoed across the Alpine Valley, announcing the birth to the surrounding countryside, while messengers raced toward Vienna with the news that would set church bells ringing throughout the empire by morning. Benedict remained at his post, maintaining the outward calm expected of the emperor's most trusted general, while inwardly offering silent prayers of gratitude for Lydia's survival. It was not until the following afternoon, after the emperor had departed for Vienna to prepare for the official celebrations, that Benedict received a summons to the empress's private sitting room. He found Lydia reclining on a chaise lounge, pale but radiant, with the newborn prince sleeping in an ornate cradle beside her. Her ladies withdrew to the far end of the room as he entered, allowing them a measure of privacy while remaining present as propriety required. "General Valcourt." Lydia's voice was tired but steady. "I wish to thank you personally for your vigilance during this significant time." Benedict bowed deeply. "Your Majesty honors me. May I offer my congratulations on the birth of the crown prince?" "You may." Lydia gestured to the cradle. "Would you like to see him?" The invitation was unexpected. Military officers did not typically view newborn princes in informal settings. But Benedict stepped forward, looking down at the tiny face of the child who would someday rule the empire he had spent his life serving. "He has your eyes," he observed quietly. "And the Habsburg jaw, the physicians assure me." Lydia smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her tired face. "They have already identified dynastic features in a day-old infant." Benedict returned her smile, understanding the absurdity of court expectations even in this most natural of moments. "He is perfect, Lydia," he said softly, using her name only when certain they could not be overheard. "You have done a magnificent thing." "I had a strange thought during the most difficult hours," she confessed, her voice equally low. "I kept thinking of our conversations about duty and personal sacrifice, about finding purpose in the roles we did not choose but must fulfill with honor. And did you find clarity in that thought?" "I did." Lydia looked from Benedict to her son, her expression serene despite her exhaustion. I realized that what we cannot have for ourselves, we might still create for the next generation. This child will inherit an empire of many nations. Perhaps through him, we can build the bridges between cultures that we have spoken of so often. The insight struck Benedict with the force of revelation. This child, born of Habsburg power and Hungarian pride, represented the future they both envisioned for the empire. A future where different peoples might maintain their identities while sharing common purpose. A future that might justify the personal happiness they had sacrificed to duty. We will guide him toward that vision, Benedict promised. You as his mother, me as his loyal servant, and as my trusted friend. Lydia's eyes held his, conveying all that could not be spoken aloud. Always that, Benedict. In that moment, surrounded by the trappings of imperial power, yet focused on the miracle of new life, they found a peace neither had expected. Their connection, forced to exist within the narrow confines of court propriety, had transformed into something larger than themselves, a shared vision for the empire's future embodied in the sleeping prince. As the years passed, that vision slowly took form. Crown Prince Karl Franz Joseph grew into a thoughtful boy who spoke both German and Hungarian with equal fluency. Empress Lydia, her position secured by motherhood, became a respected voice for cultural accommodation within the empire, gradually expanding her influence beyond Hungarian affairs to advocate for educational reforms throughout the Habsburg lands. General Valcourt remained the emperor's trusted military advisor while serving as a mentor to the young prince, teaching him not only about strategy and fortifications, but about the diverse peoples who comprised the empire he would someday rule. His friendship with the empress continued under the watchful but ultimately accepting eyes of the court, their shared interest in imperial harmony providing legitimate reason for their regular consultations. And if there were moments, a glance held too long during an imperial reception, a hand briefly supporting an elbow during a garden walk, a shared smile at some private understanding, such moments remained their secret, buried beneath layers of duty and sacrifice. It was not the love story either might have chosen. There was no passionate declaration, no dramatic elopement, no conventional happy ending. Instead, there was something rarer. Two people who recognized in each other a kindred spirit, who found ways to honor both their hearts and their obligations, who transformed personal disappointment into public service. Perhaps, in the complex calculus of imperial life, that was its own form of love story, one written not in grand gestures, but in daily choices to serve something larger than themselves while preserving the private connection that sustained them both. And perhaps, in the son Lydia gave to the empire and the future Benedict helped to shape, their impossible love found its most meaningful expression after all.